Hey, Nicole. Thanks for coming on Transform Your Workplace.
Absolutely. Excited to talk to you again.
We're going to talk about a interesting topic you brought to me, actually. It's
Yeah.
this idea of catfishing,
Yeah.
employers doing the catfishing.
Yeah.
So I've heard of like on social media, people getting catfished, which is maybe define that for us first.
Yeah. I think catfishing, people are familiar with it from the social media or dating world of you
Yeah.
think you know who somebody is, they're portraying themselves in a way that's like really interesting or attractive to you. And then when you actually meet the person or you really start to engage in that relationship, you're like, wait a second, this is not aligning with what you initially told me about yourself or any of that. And so the employer perspective on that is what candidates are seeing happen is employers are maybe portraying themselves in a really positive light or in a way that aligns with that candidate's values in the interview process, and then when they actually get to start the job, that's not the case for them or there's a mismatch.
You have a personal anecdote around
I
this, don't
do.
you?
Yeah, the reason I wanted to talk about this or brought it up to you was a lot of my friends or past colleagues obviously know that I'm in HR and I have that experience and exposure. And so I do get calls from friends or family members when things are going awry, I would say, in their professional life. And so I have had some friends and people call me recently to say, hey, I interviewed for this job. I was really excited about it. It was seemed like it was exactly what I needed. I left my prior job and now I've been in the role for a couple of weeks and I'm realizing that maybe everything they told me in the interview was not 100% true. They said that this was a mostly remote job, but now they want me to be in the office 3 days a week at least, and that doesn't work with my
Oh,
schedule. Or I would say that's the biggest one I'm hearing about is like the conversation about remote work in the interview and that not aligning with the reality of the job once they get in there. But also just about the culture in general, like portraying, oh, we're super open to your ideas and we want to support you and we want to do all this stuff. And then you get into the role, and I've had people tell me they are not wanting to make any changes. They don't want to hear what I have to say about this, and that's really challenging for me because that's what I was needing or wanting out of my next opportunity.
this topic, it makes me think of marketing, right? That's
Yeah.
my profession, and it's like you when you're marketing, you got to make sure that the product and what people experience matches what you're saying.
Yeah.
And how many people, I'm sure, listening can, and Nicole, you probably have fell into this too, but how many times have you run across like an Instagram ad or Facebook ad and you bought something on impulse, and then you get, because the marketing was good, it was a flashy picture, whatever it was that drew you to buy the product, and then you get it shipped from wherever, and you're like, oh, that's not quite what I had in
Yeah.
mind.
Doesn't quite look like the picture here. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
mean
That
that's
happens all
kind
the
of crazy.
time. And I think it's applicable from what you just said from the marketing product perspective, the
Yeah,
employer perspective, the dating realm, all like areas of life. I feel like this comes up. And I think we know as like consumers and as employees and people like that, that that's challenging, right? Like you
hmm
feel it like hurts, right? You feel like this is not what I signed up for. This is not wanted. You're confused. And there's a deterioration of trust, right? And so
yeah.
that's the biggest thing for me when it comes to an employer employee relationship is you're not starting that relationship off on the best foot if trust has already been broken in the recruiting process.
Yeah, and nowadays with things like Glassdoor and
Hmm.
Facebook to a large
Yeah.
extent, and LinkedIn, now people, if they're not having that matched experience and they end up leaving, they're probably going to start talking about your
Yeah,
company
for
in a
sure.
bad way publicly, and
Yeah.
that's going to hurt the reputation, and
Your
there's real
brand.
financial costs involved in
Hmm.
that, and talent retention and acquisition problems.
Yeah.
Any other ramifications that you can think of?
Yeah, I think morale can also suffer
Mm,
because those new employees are talking and getting to know other employees as well. And if the candidate, this new hire, is sharing that experience too with other employees when they started, they're like, "Hey, I'm confused. This is what I was told. This is what I'm experiencing." Then that's going to potentially hurt morale of the organization as a whole. And also, when you hire someone, it's a significant investment in time, in money, in a lot of different things. And if you hire somebody and then that person leaves very quickly thereafter, that's a problem. You've just wasted a lot of financial resources, but also for the rest of your team, it goes back to that morale issue. Now people are going to have to try to pick up the slack because this position is vacant again, and that's going to deteriorate trust for everyone else in the organization too, because they trusted
Yeah.
you to make a good hire and to make sure that hiring someone was going to be a good fit for them and for the organization. And then when it doesn't work out, that can really cause issues as well.
So if we get to the root cause of this is that there's a mismatch, right? We're saying one thing internally, we're saying something different, or our behavior is different. So that experience isn't there. And I remember, so years ago, I had interviewed Sean Bussey. He's an owner of a marketing brand firm in Portland, and he wrote a book called Marketing from the Inside Out. And I thought it was genius because basically, like, summarizing it, it's if you do the work internally, like on your culture and who you are, what you stand for, what you believe in, and you take care of your people, so you create a good experience, that in itself becomes its own marketing on the external side.
Yeah,
And I think that works for the product, service, and talent acquisition. Because if you've worked on and you've done the work internally on all the systems, processes, how we treat each other, our values,
yeah,
and you're all aligned, maybe inclusion practices, that shows up externally.
yeah.
And it's a lot easier to market to as well. So if you're writing
Hmm.
job postings, you can like confidently speak to it, because if it's the reality internally, then it's not some sort of facade, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really important. And to go back to your point earlier about like Glassdoor and people leaving reviews, I would say a lot of candidates are getting a lot smarter and they're looking at those reviews before even interviewing with
Yeah.
positions. And I've even seen cases where rather than just looking at reviews, they'll go on LinkedIn and find someone that currently works in that organization in a similar role and reach out to them and say, "Hey, I'm considering applying for this role at your organization. Are you liking it there? Can you tell me what your experience has been working with the organization? And if you're not taking care of your people, then you may be missing candidates because they're sharing their true experience, and that may not be what the person wants." So, like you said, treat your people good all around, and like everything else really does take care of itself. And I think in the recruiting process, it is like a sales process, right? We're trying to
Yeah.
sell this opportunity, this organization to a candidate. And so I do feel like there is the opportunity for people to embellish because they really want to fill the position, right? Or they really want to do
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z, but doing all of that on the front end isn't going to help you if the person
No.
just leaves later on, right?
Yeah. I think that's super important what you're talking about. The recruiting process, if you're doing a sales job and you're embellishing the truth, it's going to burn you.
Yeah.
And you're going to run into what we're describing in this topic. But I think like a level of transparency and authenticity goes a long way with candidates too. That way they can opt out now. You don't want to dupe them into joining your team if it's not really the experience that they're going to have. It's just going to make things worse.
Hmm.
So I think open communication, being real about what to expect, I think is really important, even if it's like the hard truth.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to give them a realistic job preview, right, of the
Yeah.
role. You want to tell them the good, and you also want to tell them the challenging aspects of the role so that they can decide if that's a challenge that they feel that they're up to, or at least come into the role if they do decide to accept, knowing what those challenges are so they can prepare themselves mentally to deal with that when they get in the organization. And I always think back to my interview, even with Xenia, coming from internal HR to a consulting role is very different. And I remember in the
Yeah.
interview process, they're like, it's tough. You have multiple different clients, it's not just one organization. And I remember them saying all of that to me. And like when you're interviewing, you're like, oh, yeah, I'm awesome. I can totally do that. Yeah, no problem. And obviously, I am still here and was up to that challenge, but I appreciate that they did that so that I could reflect on that and say, yeah, this isn't going to be what I'm used to in my current role or in my previous roles. It's going to be different. There's going to be these unique challenges that I maybe hadn't considered when I decided to initially apply for the role. And so it just gave me that opportunity so that I knew what I was getting myself into, all the positive aspects and the more challenging ones as well.
If anybody listening who hasn't gone back and maybe you're trying this out for the first time listening to us, Nicole started listening to this podcast years ago. I would say 4 or 5 years ago or something. And you
Yeah.
lived in Florida, and then you heard what we were talking about and were like, oh, wow, Xenium's cool. And then
Yeah.
decided to up and move across the country and work for us. So
Yeah.
that's an example of like where
Yeah.
the expectations that you probably designed
Hmm.
whatever in your mind based on this content and then decided to do it. You went through the interview process and all that. Did
Yeah.
you feel like those matched your expectations?
Yeah, for sure. I think I wouldn't still be at Xenium 4 years later if it didn't. But thinking of the impact that would have had if it was not in alignment with my expectations, I moved across the
You
country.
moved.
I did all of this stuff, and to start in a role and be like, oh my God, this is not at all what I thought it was going to be. The podcast was like this, the people I talked to were like this, and this is not what I'm experiencing now that I'm in the role. That would have been really hard for me, a hard pill to swallow. And so it's just really important, I think, reflecting
Yep.
on like my own experience. It was really important then. And I think it's important for a lot of other people, whether they're making a big move or not. You know, they're making a job change, and that is a
Hmm.
big move, whether it's a company up the street or a company across the country. And so just doing good by your candidates and making sure you're starting that employment relationship off on the right foot
Yep.
from that very first interview.
Yep. So I think for employers, I think the biggest takeaway that I'm going to hit home is you need to work on yourself first. And I think even if you get your HR leadership together, your recruiting team and your marketing team all together, like we need to fix or we need to
Get
work on the
aligned.
culture.
Yeah.
What are we saying? And then just get alignment. And those are your best friends right there. I think like marketing and HR really can partner together on
Yeah,
this to make sure. And I think like job descriptions and job postings play a big role in this
for
too.
sure.
I think
Yeah.
making sure that the job description actually says is what people are going to experience, because that's what they're signing up for.
Yeah, you're right. Even before that initial interview, really the experience starts when you post that job posting. And so you want to make sure that's an accurate reflection of the role because that's what people are basing the decision whether or not to even apply off of. So you just want a really
Yeah,
consistent experience, I think, throughout the whole process. And getting aligned ahead of time before you post that job posting is going to do, I think, wonders to ensure it's a good experience and that you're not catfishing your candidates.
100%. I love it. Nicole, thanks for coming on. This is a fun discussion. Anything else you want to say?
Yeah. No, just don't do it. Don't
Don't
catfish your
catfish people.
candidates. Just don't do it. Yeah.
Love it. Thanks for coming on.
Yes.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the guest's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Zenium HR or the host, Brandon Laws. The material and information presented on Transform Your Workplace is for general information and educational purposes only. Zenium HR or the host, Brandon Laws, does not necessarily endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent. Discretion is advised. Please work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs.